Think about what we do for a living. We run a 3-ring circus.
Yes.
What?
Duh, this isn't rocket science, but now you're making it complicated.
Isn't that why more and more physical educators become athletic directors? Why more and more physical educators are principals?
Caryl, you have a way of putting things very succinctly. You say a lot with just very few words.
Where we say little with a lot of words. Genius of the standards is that they're clearly written, they're intentionally vague, and it allows you, the Phy Ed teacher, to be in control of your class.
I can't imagine trying to engage an elementary child via Zoom. You want 80% of your students to be able to pass.
Welcome, physical educators. This is Thinking PE.
Because Phy Ed is more than just fun and games.
I'm Stacy Nelson.
And I'm Jamie Seneca.
And it's our goal to dig deeper beyond the activities that make your class awesome.
So buckle up and join us on this journey.
Welcome to another edition of Thinking PE. Jamie, you know what I'm thinking today? I'm thinking standards. Now, before everybody turns their cell phone off and shuts the podcast off, this is actually a pretty neat discussion we had on standards today.
Yeah, you want to talk standards, talk to somebody that wrote the standards. And we were able to get into the mind of one of the great standards writers and really ask some of those questions that we were all have in our heads. And I don't know about you, Stacy, but it put my mind at ease and gave me just a great feeling about standards.
Yeah, we had just kind of talked before we started recording here about it's like a paradigm shift, maybe not life-changing, but a paradigm shift of it might be once we get back to teaching again. But yeah, it just felt like talking to her calmed my nerves about this whole idea of the standards and what we can do. And what I love what she says, in this, she has so much confidence in us physical educators across the board, and that we already are doing a lot of these things. We just need to twist it a little bit and be able to record it and write it down. And so it's pretty cool how this conversation went. I'm really excited to share this with the community because I talk to PE teachers all the time, and there's just angst about having to reach 300. How many is 350?
335, I think.
Yeah, something like that. Benchmarks, especially at the elementary, gets a little bit less as to get into the older kids. But overall, people are like, how in the world can we assess and do all of those benchmarks? So I'm excited to share this today, for sure.
Yeah, so the great person, it's Caryl Martin's the person. She's a professor at St. Cloud State University. She was on the committee to write the Minnesota State Physical Education Standards. And we were able to get into her mind with not only how the committee was formed, how the standards were written, how they decided what was age appropriate, how to implement the standards. And then we asked her the big questions. How do we implement these in a distance learning environment? And then how do you teach this to a college student? So It was a great conversation. And let's go ahead and meet Caryl.
My name's Caryl Martin, and I, much like everybody listening, I decided I would be a physical education teacher. I accepted an athletic scholarship down in Moorhead, Kentucky, and I'm certified 712 physical education. All right. I knew that I would spend my life, middle school, high school, teaching physical education. But I ended up eventually taking a coaching position at the United States Naval Academy. Coaching track, and then at Western Kentucky University. So I kind of then thought I would be just a track coach. And I realized that I would like to go home sometime. Coaching D1 puts you on the road, 11 and a half months a year, 7 days a week. So I did a PhD down at Georgia State and taught at a community college there while I did it. Okay. And then I accepted the position at St. Cloud State for physical education. And within about a year, I ended up being the coordinator of the program. But I've worked most of this time with NASPE and NCATE, or it's CAPE. Those are the accrediting bodies for physical education at the national level. Okay. So I twice a year I go down to Washington, D.C. and work on standards and work on program reviews. And then I would travel a bit for CAPE and look at universities' programs, the education programs in totality. How about that? So I have a really, really broad background in standards and assessing standards. And no, that was never my intent. I was a track coach. Okay.
Caryl, let's shift gears for a second here, and I think part of constructing a good lesson is we start our lessons with that instant activity, that first activity, get the bodies warmed up. But we got to get the minds warmed up. So I want to throw this out there. Tell us the funniest thing you've ever seen as a teacher, whether at the secondary, at the college level, or back at your teaching days in the middle school. Funniest thing you ever saw as a teacher.
Oh, no. See, I don't know that, with skill level, and this would be at the college level, not at St. Cloud State. When I was asking, we were just introducing volleyball, and I didn't know what they knew, but they all, everyone says, yeah, I can. And so I just kind of throw out the ball on the court and let me see what they can do. And so this young man calls the ball, and I thought he was fooling around because his hands are set about here. He set the ball, and I'm thinking, he's just screwing around. And I'm watching, and the ball comes right through his hands and hits him in the face. And I'm like, what in the world? How is that humanly possible? But it was like, okay, we're going to start from the very beginning of volleyball.
That's a quick formative assessment.
Yeah.
Right. So another one for me. I grew up on a dairy farm, and as a kid, when I was in school, I got caught taking an extra milk. So here the son of a dairy farmer, getting caught taking an extra milk, which simply made no sense. So that's something I got in trouble for as a kid. Can you tell us something you got in trouble for as a kid?
High school. And I do tell my students this, so you won't shock them. I get bored easily. My mind just kind of buzzes. And so we were doing archery, and I was bored. And so I put an empty Coke can on top of the target, and I would try to shoot for that. All right, then that wasn't fun. And then I wondered, if you pull back far enough on the bow, could you send the arrow through the cafeteria window?
There's only one way to find out.
Great thought.
Yes, and the answer was yes.
Oh, and you got in trouble for that.
And I tell my students that even the people who are physically educated and love to be there will do things if they get bored.
That's so true. And now that teacher has a great something I learned the hard way story.
I thought I got in trouble for taking the extra milk.
The milk was not bad. Yeah, no.
Oh, that's a phenomenal story. I love it. Oh. Now, Caryl, you were saying that you've had this wide breadth of experience with the standards. What role did you play in developing the Minnesota standards?
I have to give kudos to our Minnesota Department of Education. I've worked with a lot of other states in my role for NCAPE, CAPE, and of course NASP. And Minnesota does a really nice job of asking us to do the job we're supposed to do. And, and holding us responsible, not just at the K-12, but the higher ed level also. Mm-hmm. So what they did was they brought in K-12 teachers, they brought in higher ed teachers, they brought in DAPE teachers, which for me, I appreciated because they're invaluable. Yeah. And we sat and worked for days on end on the standards, on what we felt that this Minnesota needed and how we could modify the national standards to reflect more of what we believed. And I think the end product, and I would say that I bet we started with at least 50 people on this committee. I would bet that they all agreed that we ended up with a better product than the national standards because we modified them slightly and we tweaked the benchmarks quite a bit to, I think, really reflect what we do in physical education.
Okay.
I believe that the DAPE folks helped us a lot when it came to elementary and when things were more developmentally appropriate.
Yeah.
Then I think that the national standards did. And so I give huge kudos to all of the DAPE folks out there, all of the LED teachers out there who stepped up and said, no, this isn't right. We need to do it this way. And then you had the Minnesota, the leadership folks from the Department of Ed saying, okay, higher ed folks, now let's fix your standards so you're putting out teachers who can do these things.
You must really love meetings.
No. Oh my God, no.
Let me ask you, what were some of the frustrations or some of the challenges as a committee and as an individual in creating those standards?
In the K-12, probably the biggest challenge would have been that when we subdivided into groups, sometimes we didn't have representation from elementary. And, for me, I'm middle school, high school. And we'd say, no, we need someone's perspective. And I'm like, I'm old. I don't care if people like me. So I'd walk across and I'd go to, in fact, it was one of the Winona people, actually, the LED person from Winona. And I said to her, I need you to come over to our group now. And I'm not asking you, I am telling you, I need you over here. So please come over and help us understand what's going on at this level in elementary. And she did. She was wonderful. But I think that was difficult because we needed sometimes broader perspectives and we don't understand everything. I surely don't. I still, at this point in my life, I'll pick up the phone and call DAPE people and ask them, please explain this to me.
Yeah. Caryl, you seem like a hard person to say no to for some reason. I
am. That's my coaching background.
Can you give us a little background into the process of narrowing down? I mean, there's hundreds of different directions the standards could have gone. How did you guys kind of filter that and get down and narrow that down?
Well, I mean, we started with the national standards because they were established. Mm-hmm. We talked about whether we agreed or disagreed, and we'd have to go to the Y-4s. We really drew on the experience of a lot of educators there. What was working for you? What do you see? And the problem is things are changing, and I know you gentlemen have talked about social emotional learning and those types of things. Well, 10 years ago, we didn't have to talk about that. Mm-hmm. 15 years ago, bullying was just an occasional thing. Mm-hmm. And now, we're all caught up in that, and we have to address those things. And so what's changed in our environment that we now have to address that the 2004 national standards didn't address? And so that's kind of where we went with it. And, what's going on? What are we seeing? What are you folks seeing in K-12? What am I seeing? What are you sending to me in higher ed? Because my students have changed. So we're all doing different things. And so that's kind of where we started with the standards. How are we going to address the changes that are happening?
Okay. Well, that's super right on. I love that.
We went from the previous version of Minnesota standards was 6 standards, and we've followed more closely to the national standards of 5 standards. Maybe we can talk a little bit. Were there things that were left out for simplicity? Were there some heated discussions on what was going to be left out or what was going to be added into to accommodate what we're seeing now in physical education?
I don't think what I have learned about the physical educators in Minnesota is that there aren't heated discussions. No matter which committee I've had to work with physical educators, everyone seems to get along and be respectful. But this group just worked at trying to narrow down, what is it we really want to say? What do we need to do? What do we need to bring into the classroom? And so I think it was actually a phenomenal experience.
I think we're really good at the fourth standard to exhibit responsible and personal social behavior.
Right. Well, but most of us have worked in teams, right?
Yeah.
For our whole life.
Yeah.
We've competed, we've run teams, we have had to learn to work together. And, if you coach, you have to learn to deal with difficult athletes, difficult parents. And so isn't that why more and more physical educators become athletic directors? Why more and more physical educators are principals?
Yeah.
If you look at the stats, we're overrepresented in these areas.
Yeah.
And it isn't because, I'm great at coaching track that would make me a good AD. That has nothing to do with it. It's your ability to work with people. And think about what we do for a living. We run a 3-ring circus.
Yes.
What other teacher can have students running all over the classroom and stop them on a dime?
Yeah.
And then refocus them and get them doing something else.
Yeah.
So it's part of who we are. We work together.
Jamie, there's several things that popped out at me listening to Caryl there in that segment. But kind of on a large scale thinking about standards, it just feels like there was a lot of thought that goes into the broad spectrum of what these standards are. It's not just like this, here's our little PE, and we're just going to get done what we need to. It's like, how do we fit into the general scheme of education in general, and how do we support the full educational spectrum, not just PE. Kind of like when she talked about the bullying type of thing. Bullying isn't a PE issue; it's a school-wide issue, and it feels like they involve these different pieces. And now, like standards 4 and 5 deal a lot with social and emotional learning, which is again not a PE thing. It's school-wide.
It's school and society.
Yeah, and it just showed me that there's just a lot of thought that went into these standards.
Just that foresight to allow the standards to grow with the unforeseen or unpredictable changes in the school environment.
Yeah, it just feels like it's just really well thought out, more so than I had thought. I looked at some of those standards when I first read them. I'm like, how do I implement this? It was all about me and my gym. And I'm realizing now that this was thought out from a whole different perspective of foresight. These are leaders in our industry, PE industry, hanging out with the leaders in general education, and how do we fit in and how do we support. And I just got a good feeling about it from that. Just it's overall really well grounded.
A statement that she made that really caught me off guard, and I never really thought about it, was that so many PE teachers become administrators, and the why. And I never really thought of it that way, that it's the ability to work with others. It's those problem solving skills and communication that's required of us physical educators, and just our natural desire to collaborate.
Yeah, I fully agree. I love how hyped that she is about PE teachers and confident she is as us as professionals. But she's got some statistics to back her up a little bit. They're going, this is true. In general, we do work well together. We do know how to manage groups, and we do know how to give and take and get things done.
Yeah, I love that managed groups part, because like she said, we live in the world of extreme excitement, stop it on a dime, and then back to extreme excitement. And that's a skill that has to be developed. So in this next segment, though, we're gonna listen to not just implementing the standards, but implementing the standards in a distance learning environment, and then how Caryl implemented the standards with her college students with distance learning. And those were both very interesting segments. So let's take a listen. And I guess I'm really curious, when implementing the standards, how do we implement them in a distance learning environment?
Oh,
Especially that piece of the social aspect, because right now I think we're learning how to implement standards in the physical standard, the throwing, the catching, and building on those
Right.
individual skills. But how do we implement all those standards?
You know, that is a conundrum, right? That's going to be very difficult. Have you folks paid attention to the Open PE website?
We're familiar
I
with
know
it.
they're starting to put out more and more information on how to handle online situations and how to build your curriculum for an online. I think we're all going to experiment. I don't think inherently this is what we do. I think we're going to have to work hard at figuring out how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, this is definitely not my area of expertise, much like everybody else. I'm struggling with my classes and what is it I need to do and what is it I need to change. And I find that my students in the Zoom environment, I call it zombie out. They just stare at me. And so I'm giving more and more assignments, and it's really cumbersome. I can't imagine trying to engage an elementary child via Zoom more than 30
You need
seconds.
to push record. Let me just tell you that. Push record when you do it. You're going to have some good footage.
Yeah. How do you get them? And that's an aspect that's problematic. It's the socialization, because we're not supposed to be putting children together.
Right.
You're risking areas we don't know. Are they sharing problems, physical ailments? We don't know. And in elementary, how important socialization is. I can see it in my neighborhood with the elementary children who are no longer getting a socialization aspect. When they finally get back into the typical environment, it's going to be a culture shock for teachers.
Yeah, it really will be.
I think so. I don't know that I have an answer or, even encouragement, but we know that the children have short attention spans, much shorter than they typically have in our classrooms. So you might have them for 20 or 30 minutes, but you've got them via internet for about 1 minute.
Yeah.
Can you ship a variety of projects? Can you engage them somehow in different things? And I would think, here's my best guess, that if I were going to work with a classroom teacher, that might work better. So what does she need them to learn, or he need them to learn? And how can I use physical education as a reward for them learning it? Forever, we've done co-curricular in our classes. We've had spelling come in. We've had geography come into our classes. We might be better served to get together and do that a lot to help each other out.
That's certainly worth exploring for sure. Yeah.
Right now, we have nothing to lose.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. But we're on full display. That's the other
Yes.
part.
Yes.
I mean, the parents are realizing, oh, these teachers actually work a lot harder. I've only got
Right.
two kids and I'm going crazy. How do they do
very
27? I get that, but there's also that piece that they're seeing what we're putting out and the effort we're putting in, and
right.
We're on display for sure.
Yes.
So I'd follow that up with, so how does this change your approach to teaching college students? So as you have students in your class, how does this change how you prepare them to come into our world?
Well, Yeah, and that is problematic for us also, because I can teach the content, so I teach an assessment class. Okay, I can do that.
Mhm.
But I'm having to use videos much like you. I'm pulling off videos of children performing skills and I'm saying, now assess this. What are you seeing? Tell me. So I'm having to make it as real as I humanly can without getting them engaged. Are you near nieces and nephews? Look at them doing this. Can you watch children playing outside? And I even start with something as simple as watching people walk. Break down what you're seeing. Now, build a tool to evaluate walking. So I'm doing the same thing you guys are doing, and I'm stumbling through it. Some things have worked, some things have not worked. And truly, I'm not going to know until they get out to you and you see them out in your classroom, whether or not I've succeeded or I've failed.
Jamie, it sounds like she was stuck in the same position we all were, where you just got to do the best you can with what you got. I don't remember her exact statement. I think it was something like, I just wanted to make it as real as possible with the limitations I had, or something like that she said. But it just shows in that we all, including her, had creativity. Like, I love that she said to her college students, well, let's break it down to walking. Just watch somebody walk, and what are you looking at? Get used to, assessing and breaking down a skill. Well, if you can't give a group of kids a lesson and evaluate it, you can watch them in what they're doing and evaluate it, even though they don't know you're evaluating them. So I just loved her willingness to go with the flow like the rest of us did.
Absolutely. And I look back, and that's an ingenious tactic by a college professor. So she's got these college freshmen that are in an assessment class, and we take it for granted when we form until they assess a class and watch for the student that needs help or the student that's above the standard. And it starts with something as simple as analyzing somebody walking and be able to create a rubric, and it's that attention to detail. And I just thought that was a fascinating way to be creative.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing what we can do when we put our minds to it and really focus. But the interesting part to this is this was recorded way back in May, and you and I are now talking in early July.
Yeah.
And so we have had some time to reflect on what we've done. We have had some time to think about what did we learn from this process. And as you think back, Jimmy, what's one of the things, or a couple of things that pop out to you, that what did you learn through that process?
And that is a great point, that as we look back is, how are we going to implement these standards? And just looking back is we can implement these standards with that creativity, but it all starts with the relationships. We have to build those relationships, student to student and student to teacher. And we can actually do that with some content. And in many ways, being creative with your content is going to help you build those relationships.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I think jumped out at me the most in the interviews and assessments we did and surveys, and that sometimes adding that content was not making it harder. It was just making it feel engaging. And like some of the students said, it didn't feel like busy work. It felt like something we were supposed to be learning. And then they're much more willing to jump in, because, man, they can smell busy work a mile away.
Oh, absolutely.
And they don't want to just be kept busy. They'll go out and bike ride. They'll do those things on their own to stay busy. But if it's PE, I just got this sense that they like having it organized, well thought out, and they wouldn't use the term meeting standards, but I think they sense that when it's all part of a bigger plan, and then they're much more willing to buy in. And it's not any harder. The activity isn't harder. It just feels like it's part of a bigger program. And yeah, I just felt you get bigger buy-in.
Right, and you said it. You said it. Busy work is your youngest kindergarten can smell out busy work, and that's no joke. And I think many of us, those first couple of weeks, we got set in a pattern of activities, fitness activities. Do this or do that, just to get us by. But that's not sustainable. And
Right.
but when you introduce that content and make it purposeful instruction, I think that's the key right there. Purposeful instruction, then you capture their attention. And Caryl had mentioned, she mentioned that. I mean, our students have, when it comes to distance learning, they have very short attention spans. So you have that small amount of time to capture their attention.
Yep. Now, assessment was a little bit harder from the distance learning, and especially you can teach a standard, but it was a little bit harder to do the assessments. And we talked to Caryl a little bit about assessing at some point, didn't we?
Yeah, so this next segment coming up here was the idea behind the assessments and how to assess and why the standards were written with this idea of intentional vagueness to support teachers writing assessments. So let's take a listen to this next segment. I was just going to say, I was going to tell you through our experience in the PLC, there was 3 of us elementary phy ed teachers in the district. And as we went through that process to develop the common assessments, what we really appreciated with the standards was some of the specific language that was in the standards to define the standards, but then we also liked the intentional vagueness.
Yes.
It was a great tap dance between the two to allow that vagueness so that we could implement those standards in any way that we saw based on our interest, our equipment that we had in our gyms,
Right.
and our abilities.
Because not all gymnasiums will have the same equipment. And and folks have to understand that. We can't, and we argued, this is one thing we argued with the Board of Teaching. You can't mandate swimming unless you're going to put swimming pools in every school. So if they have another way of meeting something, that's fine. If you're going to provide the equipment so everyone has the same thing, then we'll mandate.
No.
But until then, we want the teachers to look around and say, I can do this, and this is how.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That brings up a question for me of, when you're writing these and trying to determine what's age level appropriate, how did you gauge? Did you go for a certain, okay, in general, 85% of the students can do this? Was it 90?
No, this is purely based on research, on developmental research. You pull out your motor development book from the past, and there's just tons and tons of research at when students are physically, emotionally, and socially ready to do things.
But
And
how
so,
do they get those numbers? Because
just not every child's going to be able to do it. You're right. But a child at this age should be able to do it. Now, granted, if they've never thrown a ball before in their entire life, and they're with a student whose parents have taught them to throw a ball since they were, a year and a half, you're an elementary teacher, you know the broad differences.
Mm-hmm.
But they have the physical ability to do that. We know from research that we inside the body to the outside of the body is how we learn. Is that the closer the ball is to you, the easier it is for you. The longer the racket is, the more difficult it is. And research has shown us that. So it's not, we weren't reaching too far. Is every child going to be able to do it? No. But developmentally, they can do it. They may have to put more time and effort into learning it because they don't have the background.
Okay. Because that leads me into this assessment piece. Because this is where we get Jamie, when we were working together, we developed rubrics, and
Right.
The standards are purposely vague.
Yes,
So we can write our own assessments.
absolutely.
And so we find ourselves writing these rubrics and then trying to target, well, because the standards is pretty broad, a second grader, I guess the jump rope has a little bit more definition, but there's a lot of them that it's pretty vague language. And so we're putting ours in there.
Yes.
And then we're realizing, oh, crud. I only got 60% of the kids that are passing the standard according to this rubric. So now we go back and we rehash it and we say, is that too easy, or do we need to, is that purposeful?
Yes,
That we're supposed to go back and
because
discuss?
you know your students, you know what, you can, for instance, we do fitness testing at the higher ed level. I could say that everyone has to be able to run a mile under 5 minutes. Yeah. Yeah, right.
Have fun with that.
Yeah, I know. But you have to be realistic about, I want fitness. Well, then maybe it's not the mile, maybe it's the mile and a half because I need them to be doing cardiovascular a little longer than, 8 minutes. So yes, the intent is for you to be able to massage it, because the more difficult you make it, the more you're going to bring down your rubric, right? So yeah, can they throw a ball? Well, what am I looking for? So am I looking at the arms, the tee? Am I looking at the opposition? You get to determine that. And then once you find that your students can do that, then you raise the bar a little bit.
Yeah, that's right where we're at. That's where we're struggling with this piece of, should we raise the bar, or do we keep this as a minimum standard and now I move to a different skill, or do I go back and
you want 80% of your students to be able to pass.
Is that kind of where
That's where my brain is at.
okay?
I want 80% of my students to be able to get minimum pass, but see, you get to determine minimum pass, all right? And if they make the tee, but they don't follow through across their body, but they bring their arm in front of their body, maybe you're okay with that, all right? And the next time around, the next time you do throwing, then the arm comes across your body, or where are they stepping? So you get to determine that, and you do want 80% of your class to be able to pass.
Yeah.
So, and here's my criteria. This is what I'm looking for. Does it meet the standard? Minimally, it does. So, and then once they do that, then if you have the time, do you rebuild the rubric and say, okay, now this is what I want to see?
Yeah. I think that's the message that needs to go out even more to FIED teachers, as these standards, at least in Minnesota, these are coming down hard.
Yes.
And the anxiety is going up. I think that's a good message for people to hear, is it's up to you. And I know that adds stress to some people. For me, that helps me relax. Other people are like, well, I don't want to make that decision.
But you're the teacher. You're making that decision every day of your life.
Yeah.
How are you grading your students?
Yeah. Well, see, we're trying to common assessments too, so the junior high teachers can't tell which building they came from.
And that's okay.
So then we all want to agree, and that's still good too, as long as you're given some time to talk it out and hash it out.
Right.
That's a great message.
If you look at MNSHAPE's site, you'll see that, and I haven't looked at the elementary rubrics, but there are examples. Now, am I saying use them? No, I'm saying.
Jamie, this was the most fun I've had in that whole discussion. This was my favorite part. I just loved how she talked about the standards. The intent of them is to keep me in the classroom as the professional. It's up to me to make these decisions. And so what it comes down to is the genius of these standards is they're intentionally vague. They're set up for the teacher to make decisions. It doesn't take power away from us. They empower us to be the professional, to take what you know in your school, the facilities you have, the facilities you don't have, and adapt, and you come up. And I don't know, I guess it just gives me that feeling of they trusted us as professionals. It was like a big, huge compliment, the way they wrote those. Now, when we first were reading them, it was super frustrating as what do they want? And we're wanting to follow the rules, and we're wanting to get this figured out. So I want to do what they tell us to do. But once we figure that piece out, we're going, oh, it's written so we have flexibility. We can choose. Now all of a sudden, I see the genius in them. And that's what helped me. We said at the beginning of the podcast, for both of us, it just helped us relax. That's what this discussion, and that's what that part of the discussion did for me.
I couldn't agree more. And it's just a testament to the committee as a whole that Caryl was on there, that wrote these standards, how much work, how much thought went into making them clearly defined and intentionally vague. And how they did that tap dance between the two of them. And intentionally vague because every school is different. Every school has different equipment. You have your own personal interests, your own teaching style, your own personality. Your students have different interests. And the standards were written intentionally vague so that all teachers can adapt and adjust in order so that their students can meet the standard.
Yet they're still useful as a guideline and as a directing force. So yeah, I like the word you used. It's kind of a tap dance between the two. Fantastic.
So another part of there that set my mind at ease was just that magic number of 80%. And we went through that process creating rubrics of trying to create these rubrics that we were able to assess students and capture that 80% and then help all students. And then so we could focus in on that 20% that really needed the help.
Yeah, and I remember when we went through that process and you and I were on the team together to write those, and we wrote them and they sounded great. And then we implemented them and we come back and we go, that was a disaster. We need to rethink this whole thing. And I don't know. So if people are in that process, just be ready for that it's a whole process of coming back and forth and rewriting the rubrics and then, but the idea is to have those discussions over and over, and it gets better each time you have the discussion. Then you bring it back the next year and you try it again. So I just want to encourage people, if you're going through that process right now and you write a rubric and you're excited about it, and about halfway through lesson number 1, you're going, what in the world were we thinking? It's probably normal. It's probably just fine.
Some of those trains were out of control. But so yeah, in this next segment, we asked Caryl the big question of how much physical education is needed to meet all of these benchmarks and all of these standards, and that's a loaded question, and it leads right into how physical education can support the school as a whole. And there's some pretty interesting details in there when we start talking whole school education. So let's listen to the next piece.
Massage them to meet your needs.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it.
So before we wrap this up here, I have one question that I've stumbled a number of people that have been involved with the standards on. And it's I have to preface it, it's not a gotcha question. It's a question I asked to try to take to my district and other districts of advocacy for the appropriate amount of FIED. So
Okay.
my question is, you have 335 benchmarks, and we agree that each and every one of them are equally important. And when it comes to teaching 335 benchmarks through the course of a K-5 curriculum, what do you recommend would be an appropriate amount of FIED? Because some districts are, every other day for 25 minutes, once every 4 days for 40 minutes. There's this broad spectrum. And for me, it's not a got you. It's more of a, when the Department of Ed in MNSHAPE went and wrote these standards, they wrote these standards with the idea that we would be having X amount of physical education to complete.
Right. What I would say is I'm going to have to agree with NASB and, Shape America. This should be daily. And I think we need to advocate, we as in physical education teachers, to the state that this needs to be daily. And I know we're fighting the principals on this because they, how do you get it in there, and how do you don't have enough PE teachers, and on and on and on. But we know academically that the students will do better in all classes if you get them into the gym. All right. How often should this should be daily, and based upon age, right? You want somewhere between 30 and 60 minutes a day. And ideally in my world, it would be elementary would have 2 PE classes a day for 30 minutes. But that's not going to happen, of course. But yes, you need to meet the standards and the benchmarks. And I know it's a hard sell to principals, but in reality, if you're doing your job, your students are doing better in their other classes.
Yeah.
So you're supporting not only PE and their life, because your principals don't care when they're 60 that they're healthy. They just need them to pass the tests and get through school. But we know that they're going to do better academically if they do better in your class. So yes, I'm always going to advocate for daily PE. I've seen once, there's a school in the Twin Cities, and I bet Caitlin was there. I'm thinking she was, where they met once a week for like an hour and a half, or or they met once every 3 weeks, and it was some obscene. I'm like, how is a teacher teaching anything? Right. It's not tenable. Folks need to realize that this is about the whole person. What we do isn't only about their skills. It's about their life. It's about their emotional and social life. We do more than most academic teachers do for the student in totality. We need to not have our hands tied. And yes, I'll happily go argue with the Board of Teaching, but it comes down to the state legislature. If you know people, if you have senators or reps and you know them, that's how you get things done.
That's fabulous, Caryl. This
Well,
is so valuable for me, and I'm sure for as many people as we can get to listen to the pieces of this.
hopefully.
Yeah, for sure. I can see why Caitlin really enjoyed your classes, enjoyed how you teach. I can see the passion. I can hear it in your voice, and that makes you super engaging to listen to, for sure.
I thank you.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure working with you gentlemen.
Oh man, I hope we can keep in touch, and if we have other topics, I'd love to be able to throw it your way.
Absolutely.
Keep this collaboration going between college and, man, if you got some more student teachers, even half as good as Caitlin, I'll take them.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I gotta say thank you as well, Caryl. And it was very enlightening, and just that deep perspective and the deep understanding of the standards and physical education as a whole. So a lot of great information. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're a gem. Thank you so much.
Bye, gentlemen.
All right. Take care. Well, Jamie, that was interesting to hear her try to answer your question, which isn't an easy question. Your question was really, how much time does it take to teach 356 benchmarks and assess them? And there's not a real answer for that, I guess, because you can do it in shorter or longer time, and the longer you have, hopefully, the better it'll get. But she seemed to really be advocating strongly. That's what I sense I got for that everyday PE, which is so awesome to have people in places where she's at and at the influence she has to advocate that way. But the real question comes up for us in the fall. I'm not going to have that, and you're not. So now what? And we're back to this. What do we do as PE teachers when we're not given full resources? And that's kind of what we need to really be thinking on. If we don't have the dream, what do we do now?
And that's, if you go back to her discussion, she talked about minimally achieving the standards. And that with that everyday Fred, I think we could really go into depth in every student meeting every standard. But we're scraping the surface here of those standards and doing the best we can, because the ultimate goal is everyday PE. But that's just not, in most districts, I would say a vast majority of districts, that's an unattainable goal.
Right. But it was kind of an interesting piece that she mentioned about principals and administrators, that they're not necessarily on the same page with us with our PE goals. Our PE goals are, we want healthy adults, and that's our end goal. And not that they don't want that, but what their pressure is on them is for immediate test results. And that's where you and I were having this little bit of a discussion about, well, maybe this could be a dance where we can help each other. You want to kind of briefly state what we were chatting about?
Because we're looking for those lifelong learners. We're looking to help, an 80-year-old be, have the skills that they develop throughout their life to still be active.
Yep.
And from an administrator's perspective, they have those same goals too, but they have the immediate pressure of test scores now.
Yeah.
And that's the downside. So it just kind of goes into, we're not going to get everyday PE as much as we advocate for it, we're going to keep advocating for it, but it may be an unattainable goal, but it's how do we increase the movement throughout the day of the students?
Yeah. And I think Caryl mentioned at one point the idea of coming alongside of teachers, classroom teachers, and that's an interesting idea of if we can't get more kid time in the gymnasium, maybe we can get kids active outside of the gymnasium, and maybe we can come alongside the teachers and help them not just get exercise. You know, we all know that test scores will go up if the kids get more blood flow into their brains while they're in their classroom. And so if we can help teachers be purposeful in doing some activity, not just moving, but maybe there's something that fits along with our curriculum. And if we can get kids moving outside when they're at home, not just randomly moving, but help them get really specifically doing some things that we would do in the gymnasium and doing some extra practice. Or I don't know how it would look exactly, but I think that's maybe the path we need to really start pounding on and paving out a little bit.
No, it's just the concept of that purposeful instruction, and not helping classroom teachers is something more than just brain breaks.
Yes.
So, you know, they always talk to us, how do we incorporate math and literature into our gym?
Yep.
How can we help the classroom teachers include movement in their math and their literature?
Yes.
So it's kind of a reverse thought. It's a very interesting concept, but again, it provides that more movement throughout the student's day, more meaningful movement, not just run around the school 3 times to get out the wiggles.
Right.
You know, so very 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 purposeful.
And it helps the principals accomplish their goal. It helps the teachers accomplish their goals of not only higher test scores, but classroom management and a bunch of other factors that research has shown has helped. So it's us helping them, that helps us, and we become an integral part, again, of the entire education system, not a separate time for the kids just to go play.
And it's how great of an impact as a physical educator you can have, because number one, you see every one of the students throughout the school.
Yep.
You have that impact. You can help shape the culture of the school. You can help shape the discipline of the school and shape the emotions of the school. So we have a huge impact on the school as a whole.
Yeah, I agree.
So, you know, to close out here, the genius of the standards is that they're clearly written, they're intentionally vague, and it allows you, the phy-ed teacher, to be in control of your classroom.
And that is Thinking PE.
Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter at Thinking PE. Find us on all your favorite podcast providers by searching Thinking PE. For more resources and videos, go to www.thinkingpe.com. Thanks for listening.